The night the ferry didn't return. My name is Captain William Torres, and I'm 44 years old. I work as a ferry captain operating the night route between Seattle and Bremerton, Washington. And the night, a severe thunderstorm rolled in, and a passenger went missing from the enclosed ferry. During the crossing is the night I discovered that sometimes people can disappear from moving vessels in ways that seem physically impossible, and the truth about what happened would challenge everything. I thought I understood about what was happening on my boat. Before I begin, if you work on maritime vessels and someone goes missing, never assume they fell overboard before thoroughly checking the entire vessel. Keep listening, because the passenger who disappeared that night was not the person everyone thought they were. And the reason they vanished would lead me down a path of investigation that would uncover something far darker than a simple accident. I had been commanding the night ferry between Seattle and Bremerton for about 7 years. The route ran from 10 at night until approximately midnight, depending on weather and sea conditions. It was roughly 90 minutes of travel across Puget Sound. The ferry was a large vessel designed to carry up to 250 passengers and about 80 vehicles. Most nights, we carried maybe 50 to 100 passengers, depending on the season and the day of the week. The night shift attracted a specific type of traveler: commuters who worked unusual hours, travelers heading to or from the airport, occasional tourists, people who didn't mind the late-hour travel. Thursday night started routinely. We had about 70 passengers boarding at the Seattle terminal. They were scattered throughout the vessel. Some were in the main passenger cabin. Some were in the upper lounge area. Some were in the vehicle deck if they were traveling with cars. I was on the bridge preparing for departure. My crew was doing their final safety checks. Everything looked normal. We departed at 10:15 p.m. The forecast had mentioned a severe thunderstorm moving into Puget Sound around 11 p.m. I had confirmed with the Weather Service that the storm was real and that we would be navigating through it before reaching Bremerton. The decision was made to proceed with the crossing. We had navigated through storms before. The ferry was built to handle rough seas. The crossing could be completed before the worst of the storm arrived. By 10:45, the storm was already visible on the horizon. Dark clouds rolling in from the Pacific, lightning illuminating the sky in the distance. The sea was starting to show agitation. The swells were increasing. The wind was picking up. But we were past the point of turning back. We were in the middle of Puget Sound, and we were committed to reaching Bremerton. At 10:50 p.m., I made an announcement asking all passengers to remain seated and to not move unnecessarily due to the approaching storm. I told them that the sea conditions were expected to worsen, but that the ferry was designed to handle the crossing. I instructed them to stay in the main passenger areas and not to go out on the exterior decks. Everything was standard safety protocol. By 11 p.m., the storm hit with full force. The rain was coming down so hard you could barely see. The wind was howling. The ferry was moving up and down with the swells. The vessel was swaying side to side. Inside the passenger cabin, people were holding onto seats and railings. Some people were getting sick. The crossing was becoming rough, but we were managing. We were on schedule to reach Bremerton by midnight. I was monitoring the bridge closely. I was watching the weather. I was watching our course. I was making sure we stayed on track and safe. One of my crew members, a deckhand named Jason, came into the bridge. He said there was a passenger reporting someone missing. I said, "What do you mean, missing?" He said a woman had gone to the bathroom on the lower deck and hadn't come back. Her friend was getting worried. I said the crossing is rough. People sometimes take longer in the bathrooms because of the motion. I said, check the bathrooms. Check the lounge areas. The person is probably just disoriented from the storm. Jason went to do that. I continued monitoring the crossing. About 5 minutes later, Jason came back to the bridge. He said the woman was not in any of the bathrooms. He said they had searched the lower deck. He said the woman was nowhere on the ferry. I said that's not possible. The ferry is moving. The woman is somewhere on this vessel. Jason said they had looked everywhere. The woman was gone. I made the decision to continue to Bremerton, but to alert the Coast Guard about a possible missing passenger. I contacted the Coast Guard and reported the situation. I provided a description of the woman based on what her friend had told me. The Coast Guard said they were monitoring the situation and would have resources standing by if needed. They asked if I was certain the passenger had been on the ferry at boarding. I said yes. Multiple witnesses had seen her boarding. We reached Bremerton at midnight. The storm was still intense. The vessel was still being tossed by rough seas. But we had made it. We docked. I immediately organized a thorough search of the entire ferry. I had my crew check every compartment, every storage area, every enclosed space, every possible location where a person could be hiding or could have ended up. We searched from top to bottom. We searched multiple times. The woman was not on the ferry. We had searched every possible location and she was not there. It was as if she had simply vanished from a moving vessel with no way to exit, no way to escape, no way to have gone overboard without being seen. She had simply disappeared. The Coast Guard arrived. They conducted their own search. They confirmed what we had found. The woman was not on the ferry. The Coast Guard organized a search and rescue operation. They searched the waters around where the crossing had occurred. They looked for any sign of the woman. They sent divers down. They found nothing. But then something happened that changed everything. A woman matching the description we had provided for the missing passenger showed up at the Bremerton police station. She was soaking wet. She was disoriented. She was suffering from severe hypothermia. She said she had been in the water. She said she had fallen off the ferry. She said she had been treading water in the storm, and a Coast Guard boat had found her and pulled her out. I was confused. We had searched the ferry thoroughly. We had not found any indication that the woman had gone overboard. I reviewed the video footage from the ferry security cameras. What I saw was disturbing. The footage showed a woman who looked like the missing passenger leaving the bathroom around 11:15 p.m. But the footage showed a second person with her, a man. The man was standing very close to her. The man seemed to be escorting her. The man seemed to be directing her toward a specific location. I watched as the man guided the woman toward the exterior door that led to the lower deck. I watched as he opened the door. I watched as he seemed to be talking to her. And then I watched as he guided her out onto the deck, into the rain and the wind and the storm. The Coast Guard was shown the footage. Investigators were brought in. What unfolded was a story of attempted murder. The man in the video was identified as Derek Mills. He had a history of violence. He had a history of domestic violence specifically. The woman who had gone overboard was his ex-girlfriend. She had been trying to leave him. She had taken out a restraining order. She had filed police reports. But she had decided to get on the ferry to try to escape from him. Derek Mills had discovered she was on the ferry. He had boarded at the last minute. He had confronted her in the bathroom. He had forced her out onto the deck. He had pushed her into the water. He had intended for her to die. He had believed the storm would cover the evidence. He had believed her death would be ruled an accident. But the woman had survived. She had been an excellent swimmer. She had managed to stay afloat even in the rough seas and the storm. A Coast Guard boat conducting a routine patrol had spotted her in the water and rescued her. She had survived an attempted murder. Derek Mills was arrested. He was charged with attempted murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. But what haunts me about that night is the realization of how close the woman came to dying. If the Coast Guard hadn't been conducting that patrol, if the storm had been even slightly worse, if the woman hadn't been a strong swimmer, she would have died. Derek Mills would have gotten away with murder. The scariest part is understanding that none of this would have been discovered if I hadn't implemented a thorough search protocol. If I had accepted the assumption that she had fallen overboard accidentally. If I had not ordered the security footage to be reviewed. The crime would have been classified as an accident, and Derek Mills would have walked away. What also haunts me is the realization that I was commanding a vessel where an attempted murder was being committed, and I didn't know it was happening. The woman was on my ferry. She was under my responsibility. She was being attacked while I was on the bridge, navigating through the storm. I was completely unaware that a crime was happening on my vessel. The thunderstorm that raged that night was severe, and it provided cover for what Derek Mills was attempting. The storm made it difficult to see. The storm made the exterior decks dangerous. The storm made it difficult for anyone to notice what was happening. The storm was the environment that Derek Mills needed to commit what he intended to be murder. But the woman survived. She survived the push. She survived the water. She survived the storm. She survived the attempted murder. And because she survived, justice was served. Because she survived, Derek Mills is in prison. Because she survived, I learned the true responsibility of commanding a vessel with people on board. I continue to captain the night ferry. I continue to make the crossing between Seattle and Bremerton. But I am different now. I understand that danger can exist anywhere. I understand that people can commit violent crimes in places we think are safe. I understand that the responsibility of commanding a vessel means being aware of everything happening on that vessel at all times. Every time a severe storm rolls in now. Every time the crossing becomes rough. Every time the weather makes visibility difficult. I think about that night. I think about Derek Mills pushing a woman into Puget Sound. I think about the woman treading water in the storm, praying to survive. I think about the Coast Guard spotting her in the darkness and the rain. I think about the fact that justice was served only because she was strong enough to survive. The ferry continues to operate. Passengers continue to board. The night route continues. But there is a memorial now. A plaque on the lower deck dedicated to the woman who survived an attempted murder on the waters of Puget Sound. A memorial to the fact that someone took the time to search thoroughly. Someone took the time to review the footage. Someone took the time to understand that what appeared to be an accident was actually a crime, and I am grateful for that. I am grateful that the woman survived. I am grateful that Derek Mills is in prison. I am grateful that I was thorough in my investigation. I am grateful that we have systems in place to catch people who commit violent crimes even in the most unlikely places. Because on that night, on that crossing, in that storm, a man tried to murder a woman on my ferry. And if it hadn't been for careful investigation and a strong woman and a Coast Guard boat in the right place at the right time, the murder would have been successful, and Derek Mills would have walked away believing he had gotten away with the perfect crime. The rain that fell that night, the wind that howled, the storm that raged. These were the conditions that Derek Mills believed would cover his crime. These were the conditions that he believed would make his attempted murder look like an accident. But instead, these conditions became the backdrop for a woman's survival. The backdrop for justice. The backdrop for the understanding that nothing that happens on a vessel under my command goes unnoticed or uninvestigated. I will never forget that night. I will never forget the footage showing Derek Mills forcing a woman out onto the exterior deck. I will never forget the knowledge that attempted murder was being committed on my vessel while I was unaware. I will never forget the woman who survived. And I will never forget the lesson that even in places we think are safe, even in places we have systems and protocols and safety measures, danger can still exist. Crime can still happen. And sometimes the only thing standing between murder and justice is someone paying attention. Someone searching thoroughly. Someone refusing to accept the easy explanation and demanding the truth. The thunderstorm of that night has long passed. The seas have calmed, but the memory remains. The memory of a storm that nearly cost a woman her life. The memory of a man who tried to commit murder in the darkness and the rain. The memory of survival and justice, and the understanding that sometimes the scariest things happen, not in isolated places, but in places full of people. On vessels full of passengers. In locations where we assume we are safe, but where danger can exist, hidden in plain sight.